Hi, this is Phoenix, and 2 years ago I came out with my first published book, Silent Noise. I'm going to talk about silent noise on this video um, to kind of shed light on what it is I've been working on through time. I started my YouTube video 2 years ago, my YouTube channel 2 years ago as well, and if you go to the early videos, the first few videos that I have on my YouTube channel, you'll see that I have readings of the chapters, a few chapters of some of my book, of this book, Silent Noise. I have a few chapters such as Tennyson, such as Sweet Victory, and some others. And I was very excited to do that, and basically I want to retrospect a little bit on this book, and basically how far I've come. So, Silent Noise is an interesting novella. It is all about poetry. Basically, the story, as I always like to describe to people, centers around Micah Smith, a deaf and mute 9-year-old who really loves poetry and who can communicate poetry with his beautiful sign language, basically with his hands. And as you can imagine, that's why it's called Silent Noise. Not to delve too much into it, but I was really interested with the title and with that theme of how something can be both silent but also noise at the same time. And that was what really inspired this book. The book is very beautiful, I would say, in a lot of ways. I don't mean that as self-praise, I just mean that in terms of the aesthetics of the book, in terms of the themes of the book, in terms of what the book is about, and basically how much the book is doing creatively, and what it's doing in terms of the characters, and the character Micah Smith. There are many chapters in the book, and as I've described in the past to friends and to people who have read the book, it is essentially a tour through poetry. So there's a chapter called Mute, where I talk about the avant-garde, which includes conceptual poetry, modernist poetry, and other types of poetry. And that's fun. There's a chapter called Secular Metaphysics where I dive into a conversation about Plato's theory of mimesis with Micah and his friend, his newly discovered friend Socrates, who goes by the name Socrates, but his name isn't really Socrates. But nonetheless works for him to go by that name, especially because he likes to employ the Socratic method to ask questions about poetry and to figure out what poetry is. There's other chapters as well that dive into themes as varied as the Harlem Renaissance and poetic moves and movements such as the Harlem Renaissance, such as Australian poetry, such as medieval poetry. In fact, speaking of medieval poetry, Dante is a huge influence for this book, specifically because Dante highly influences the protagonist, Micah Smith. He basically loves Dante, loves the Divine Comedy. He's reading the Divine Comedy and he's enjoying it. And and he loves the Divine Comedy and it really inspires him. And there's a character that is inspired by Beatrice in the Divine Comedy called the Ghost Girl. She's just a little girl and you find out that she died of cancer and she's literally a ghost. And basically it's Micah's job to try to free her. That was a really beautiful love story that I couldn't help but tuck into the novella. And if you read this book, I hope that you enjoy it. Enjoy that specific theme and strand and plot thread. But there's other plot threads as well. You meet Milton, who is another kid, a business kid, who's very savvy with business and enjoys thinking about refining his business skills. And he basically meets with Micah and wants to help him as a poet. But through that story, Micah ends up humbling his friend. There's a lot of other adventures that Micah has as well, because it literally is a tour through poetry and a tour through the world in a sense, as well as a tour through the world of poetry and through the world of speculative fiction. There are a lot of speculative elements in this book, such as the Ghost Girl, who is literally a ghost. But there are other elements as well. There's a scene in a chapter called The Dreamscape, where there's a painter, a surrealist painter, a kid as well, and he paints a lot of really beautiful paintings. And then um, the paintings of it, there's one specific painting, if I remember right, that becomes reality. Um, and it's a really beautiful and magical moment, and a nod to surrealism. So I don't really know what else to say about this book, but I do want to tap into Micah Smith's character before I go and before I close. And I would basically say that Micah is one of the most beautiful characters that I think I've been able to craft with language and through words. He basically jumps out of the page at me because of how much he understands. And Micah Smith is supposed to be a very gentle character because he understands what it's like to have a disability, but he doesn't let his disability stop him. And that's why he goes into the world and he shares his poetry. And he's tenderhearted. There's a really tragic scene where he's bullied. That chapter is called "The True Disadvantage," and he's bullied. But his strength and resilience shows, even though he gets caught up in a moment, or caught in a moment of vulnerability. But he continues trekking forward. And really, I know that that is a nod to my own disability. I have schizoaffective, and it's changed my life in so many ways. And it's been very difficult. And so even though I'm not deaf and mute, I can relate to the whole disability complex, or the aspect of having a disability, because I know how you can be really, really mistreated by people. In fact, just a few days ago, I was mistreated horribly at an establishment. I won't go into the details, but suffice to say it was because of my disability, and because people don't understand what it's like to have a disability. But the thing is, the emphasis isn't on disability, though, right? It may be, this book may be focusing on certain aspects of identity, but it's not focused on the limits of disability, but rather the way in which a disability can empower you. And that's why Micah Smith, I think, is one of the strongest characters I've ever created. Because basically Micah Smith doesn't let his deafness and his muteness get in the way. And I think that that's really important for me personally to keep in mind. And that's why I say that Micah Smith is a nod to many of my own troubling circumstances, many of my own troubles, and the ways I've been hurt because of my own disability and disabilities and my own trauma from all of that. But also realizing that there's a lot that can be done, there's a lot that we can do, and Micah Smith is a call to action to get stuff done, to chase your dreams, and to follow your heart. This is Phoenix, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. I also hope that you'll check out this book. I'm an indie writer, and I'd appreciate your support. Just type in Silent Noise and Phoenix on Amazon, and you can find this book with the cover, with the blue cover of the headphones. And I hope that you'll give it a shot. This is Phoenix, and thank you.